That brings us to public hearings. Item number 8 is regarding a notice to vacate and an abatement at 743 El Cajon Boulevard. And staff, would you tell us about that? Hello, sir.
Hello, Mayor Wells, City Council. Sorry, I've got a little bit of head cold going on.
That's okay, you're doing fine.
Well, you've seen my agenda report. This facility did install, it was a marijuana dispensary. It did install these electronic magnetic locks. They're very problematic because you have to actually buzz somebody out to leave the building. In this particular case, it was even on a remote. So if somebody misplaced that remote, you couldn't really buzz anybody out if there was a fire in the building, or if somebody came in and tried to rob the place, that kind of thing. It could be a very big problem. So we requested that SDG&E remove the meter for the property. This is kind of standard procedure for us because we don't get a lot of cooperation from the business itself. So they did remove the meter from the building. Unfortunately, they installed a generator inside the building that was actually venting on the inside of the building. And it was almost comical in a sense because I actually warned them, do not do this, it's dangerous. And but they did it anyway. They installed this generator, and it actually made some people sick, made 3 people sick. 1 was transported to the hospital. So at that point, the police department confiscated the generator. We boarded the structure. They opened back up. We boarded them again. It has since been vacated by the tenant and returned back to the property owner, who is here today. And so we are standing before council requesting that we be reimbursed the cost of boarding, the cost of our response, administrative costs, etc.
Council, any questions? See if there's any questions for you, sir.
Don't we fine these businesses a certain amount per day, $2,500 a day, and has that been done?
Mr. McClellan, this does not include the administrative fines that have been issued. This is just for the cost that staff incurred, the direct cost staff incurred to abate the property, to board it up, to make it safe. So we will be collecting that other fee through a different process, but for right now we wanted to get the actual dollar amount that we spent on abating the property as a lien if it can't be paid.
Yeah, I think when we find one of these dispensaries, we need to notify the property owner that they will be fined $2,500 a day, that it's open and not shut down, because of the fact that they need to know what their liability is going to be. That would be a good practice, maybe, to notify them immediately that they're under the gun for $2,500 a day until their tenant leaves.
Actually, when we cite, we actually cite the business operator as well as a property owner. So there's actually 2 citations that go out when we find one of these illegally operated dispensaries. So
the property owner knows right away that
that's absolutely correct.
On the hook for $2,500 a day.
That's correct.
Great. Okay.
All right. Before we go to public speakers, any more questions from council? All right. Angela, any public speakers on this issue?
We have one speaker, James McCormack.
All right. I'd like to open the public hearing and invite James up. Mr. McCormack, how are you doing?
Mayor Wells, I'm fine, but not fine, as you can imagine. Looking at a $6,000 bill, and council members, thank you for letting me speak. And let me say right up front, I am not a marijuana user, never have been, never will be. It was problematical for me as a squad leader in Vietnam, trying to figure out who was going to be safe and who wasn't. I do not appreciate this stuff. But I also don't appreciate receiving 4 administrative citations in 4 days. Before I ever received the first citation, and in the finding process, I've been issued 3 more. It's a little unreasonable. As to this $6,000, the same thing applies. By the time I received notice that I was ordered to secure the premises and board it up, it was being done. When I arrived, city staff was there boarding it up. And in a way, I thank them, because I couldn't get rid of these people. the law enforcement and the fire department did the trick. They headed for the woods, and frankly, I haven't seen them since. And they don't answer their phone. But to be clear, I did not rent this building to a marijuana dispensary. I sold this building to an individual who told me he was going to try and open a liquor store, which I found ludicrous in the middle of the block with no parking. But it had been vacant for 3 years. And after 3 years, I was receptive to the offer to purchase, even though I had my misgivings, which proved to be true. Bottom line is, I believe that $6,000 for 5 pieces of plywood is a little onerous. And I would ask you to reconsider that.
I have some questions. You mentioned that you sold the property, you didn't rent the property. Why are you here then? If the property had moved out of your name and was transferred into the name of another person, why are we seeing you?
Because we did not effect a transfer. We were still dealing with an attorney who was preparing a sale agreement.
Okay.
That particular attorney no longer works for me. After 3 weeks, she still hadn't produced it. I reached out to another attorney, and by then the fuel was in the fire. Okay. And I didn't want to sell it to them. I was hoping that we could get rid of them.
And before I go on, I forgot to mention, thank you for your service in Vietnam.
Oh, thank you.
So this is an important question for me. Did you know that this was going to become a marijuana dispensary?
I guessed that it was going to be after the second meeting, but by then we had entered into an agreement. I should have just blown out of the agreement and taken my lumps on that side of the ledger. I was told it was going to be a liquor store.
Well, thank you for being so honest with me. I appreciate that. Let me see if there are other questions from the council. Yes, sir.
So escrow did not close. You just allowed them to take early possession.
Yes, I took a first and last month. I agreed to rent to own until we could get through the escrow process.
So you received some kind of monies from this buyer.
Yes.
Okay. And first and last is what you're saying is the limit of what you collected from them, or did you collect a monthly rent as well during a holdover?
That is the monthly rent. First and last is typical in a rental scenario.
And how many months were they there?
They actually moved in October 15th.
Okay.
I believe the lockout occurred the 29th of November.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
City staff would be able to affirm that, I think. 29th of October, Dan? 27th?
Ben?
Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused too. So you took first and last month's rent. That's it?
That's it. The idea was to get the balance at the close as we entered into the escrow, to get the balance of the first down payment.
So they were going to...
So I was renting to them, but that was not my intent. I do not enjoy selling properties that I've had for 34 years, but frankly, this property, that whole end of El Cajon Boulevard, has become such a problem. I've spent $9,000 there this year, painting buildings, fixing fences, ejecting the homeless.
Yeah, so you tried to sell it, the sale didn't go through, then they went to rent to own. You collected 2 months worth of payments, and that's it.
They paid me once on October 15th.
For 2 months, they've never paid you, and then you took, they forfeited their escrow deposit, right, too?
They forfeited everything. They don't even answer their phone now.
I'm saying that
Well, I'm sorry, there was no escrow ever opened. We never got that point.
Okay.
My attorney, Susan Lamson, let me down big time on that.
Sounds like a messy transaction. Okay, well, I get it.
Alcohol Boulevard.
Well, you've since, now you're the owner again.
Still.
So it never went to escrow. It went to a purchase agreement that your attorney drafted up. That deal fell through. Then you got a whiff that they were selling marijuana, and then you
then you're here now.
It's much more than a whiff, Mr. Kalasho. I still had my office right next door. The odor is horrible.
Okay, so you really knew.
I knew
then.
what they were up to after they'd been there about a week. And they installed a bunch of crazy doors and windows and walls, all of which I'm going to have to remove now once I get a building permit to remove them.
I know it's hard to keep up with like city ordinances and whatnot, but did you know that it was illegal to have that here within the city?
Yes.
Thanks.
A follow-up question. The public will ask, why should you keep 2 months' worth of rent, and yet the people of El Cajon should incur the cost of enforcement? What would your response be?
Mr. Goebel, I'm not asking you to incur the entire $6,000. I am saying that I believe $6,000 for the work that was performed is outrageous, frankly. But then I haven't seen the invoice. I don't know exactly what was done to incur that $66,1695.
Gary?
How much money did they give you altogether in that payment?
Altogether, $20,000.
$20,000 for 2 months of rent?
Yep.
Didn't you think that was a little excessive?
Considering what they wanted to do, to go into my building and start making changes without going to escrow? No, I didn't think so at all. I was looking to gather some income off this property. It's been vacant for 3 years.
My understanding is the marijuana dispensary is taking about $10,000 a day and typically pay enormous amounts of rent because that part of the cost of doing business. But didn't it make you a little suspicious?
Yes and no. I was suspicious, but I was anxious to make a sale. We did not make a deal at $3,000 a month. They offered to go to 20, knowing that we were going to be at least 60 days getting the attorneys to do this agreement because we were not using a realtor.
Thank you.
So I do have $20,000. I can pay this. I'd rather not.
Would that $20,000 have come off the total cost of the house?
What's a commercial property, Mr. Mayor?
I'm sorry. So I mean, would it have come when you were taking the $20,000? You say, well, this $20,000 is going to come off the total cost of the property when I sell it.
Oh, yes. Excuse me. Yes, it would. That would go toward the down payment.
Okay, Steve.
Following up, the $6,600, $600 was for administrative costs, $880 was community development staff time, $3,200 was for public works staff time and boarding material costs. The fire department is $1,900. The fire department's in there because there was a very dangerous incident there on November 29th in which they were running a generator inside, and I think the police department saved the lives of 2 people that day. So the fire department response for that is not a normal cost of service to the community. So that's your $6,600, $1,800 for the fire department, $3,200 for the public works, $800 and $600 for the community development overhead cost. Now I'm going to come back to my question. If you receive $20,000 in rent, can you see how the public would say, why should he keep $20,000 and we, the people of El Cajon, have to absorb $6,600?
Mr. Goebel, you have to also understand I still have another $24,000 fine pending. So I'm struggling to save something somewhere. The $24,000, I am told, is not something that can be appealed. The appeal period has apparently gone by. So I'm on the hook for an additional $24,000 of staff time, penalties, and so forth that Mr. McClellan alluded to. But again, I received my first notice in the mail. There are 3 more successfully coming in, at which point we're already in fine. This is on the administrative side. Even if I could get them out, the minimum time it would take to get them out, I believe the city attorney can attest to this, by the time you do an unlawful detainer and go through the waiting periods, you're 30 days. I already owe $24,000. As I said earlier, the city did me a favor by getting rid of these people because at this point they're belligerent and not nice. Very, very much not nice.
I understand you're facing probably remodel costs. You're facing some civil penalties. I just come back to the public would ask me, why are you waiving $6,600 or a portion thereof and let him keep $20,000? I understand you have additional costs. I'm sympathetic. I think really this comes down to an error in judgment on giving them the property before you closed escrow. And now you have legal liability for things as a result. I think your intent was not bad, but nonetheless, there was a harm to the people of El Cajon that incurred costs. And we're the watchdogs of the city's resources. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from.
I hear you, and I actually agree with you, Mr. Goebel. You're absolutely correct. But I will also throw in that I have 2 additional lawsuits as a result of this occupancy. I have one for ADA noncompliance because they didn't install a ramp.
Bob.
And that's $20,000 more, it looks like.
Morgan, got a question. Does a property owner, where somebody puts an illegal business in their property, do they have a right to get them out of there right away? Is there a process for doing that?
Well, there's an implied covenant that you do not commit illegal acts when you're leasing a piece of property, and that does give the property owner the chance to declare a breach of the contract, in my opinion, and seek a removal of the tenant, or at least seek them to give them notice and require them to cease and desist that activity. And if they don't within the 3-day notice, to quit that type of illegal activity. I think it's still 3-day notice for a commercial property. They have the right to start the unlawful detainer process.
And how long does that take?
Well, that could take quite some time when you have a very sophisticated tenant, because they can drag it out as for many weeks to come.
So their best bet is to call the city and tell them to have the electric meter removed. And
let me make it clear, we do not go out directing SDG&E to remove meters without an appropriate background that reflects that there is an immediate life and safety issue going on. It was because, as Mr. Paval indicated, because of an illegal installation of magnetic locks for doors, which violates the building code, and we have taken this position on these types of improvements that is illegal, that does justify the removal of the meter. SDG&E will remove them, and then we proceed from there.
And the gentleman stated that he knew that it was a marijuana thing because of the smell. So if he'd acted right away and contacted the city and said there's an illegal marijuana there, and they've done some modifications to the building, would you help me in sending the staff out to help me get them out of there?
Well, there's a lot of process that needs to be completed before we can do that. The reason we had access to this one so quickly was because of the inspection that occurred. They were allowed, our inspectors were allowed to go entry to the building, and they saw the mag locks. That's the first thing we look for sometimes in these things, and that led to the building department to seek the termination of the meter, to have the meter pulled by SDG&E. And when that happened, they installed generators, and there was a call for an emergency response. I think our PD was there because of if I recall, there was a call that came in over 911, and they either responded to that or responded for some other reason. They called the fire department, or they were called as well. They showed up and took the 2 individuals who were sick and treated them. One, as Mr. McCormack said, or Mr. Paval said rather, was transported to the hospital and was in serious condition for a while. But we don't get access to that without permission of the tenant or the property owner. If there is no tenant, then the property owner can always give us access. But otherwise, we'd have to get an inspection warrant from the court, just like a police department would need a search warrant for searching for illegal activities.
But as the gentleman stated, he was the property owner, and he could have called the city and asked them to go in and check it out, since he knew it was an illegal activity.
Well, I think it's a little more difficult than that. Even as the property owner, I don't know what his lease term says. If his lease had allowed him immediate access, he could have had access himself. I don't know. But from our perspective, we need to have the people who are in possession of the property, in this case, it would have been the tenant, to allow us access to inspect the property. And in fact, that was allowed when they walked in, and our building officials or enforcement officers, code enforcement officers from the planning division went in and inspected and saw that it was an illegal activity.
Thank you.
Sir, what's the square footage of the building, and how much was the sale price?
Well,
Proposed sale price?
we were attempting to sell for $700,000. The building is right at 4,000 feet. It has a parking lot in the rear. The lot size, I don't have memorized. I believe the lot is 12,000 or 13,000. It has the alley access on the rear. It should have parking on the front, but there's never any parking in the front, especially since the 2-hour parking signs came down. Nothing ever moves out front.
Have you attended this? Has it been listed by you before, that building?
No.
So they just came to you?
They approached us, yes. Actually, we've been approached twice. One was by the next door neighbor, Joe's Tires, and by these gentlemen.
What was the offer from Joe's Tires?
I believe they wanted to give us $600. We wanted $750. We've had friction with them in the past. I wasn't really wanting to sell to them. So we walked away from that deal.
Okay. Well, in my opinion, you came out pretty well, because if that guy would have died on your property, that would have caused all sorts of problems for you in lawsuits.
Mr. Kendrick, it's worse than that. What they did to put in that generator and the jury rigging they did with an extension cord was a recipe for a fire. When I saw it, I was dumbfounded. I have never seen anything dumber in my life.
Right. Thank you.
One last question. I'm going to move this along. Do you have other properties that you own in El Cajon?
Yes, I have 799 El Cajon Boulevard, the corner of Wilson and El Cajon Boulevard. It's currently occupied by G.I. Joe's.
I don't need to, just how many properties do you own in town?
Those two. And G.I. Joe's has given me notice he's leaving in March. He can't deal with the homeless anymore.
Have you ever had other problems with marijuana dispensaries?
No, I've never been involved with
All right.
that kind of thing here.
I'm going to have you go ahead and sit them and see if there's any other people who want to speak, and then we're going to talk about it in the council. We may call you back up if there's more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other speakers?
No, sir. No more cards.
All right, I make a motion that to close the public hearing. Moved and seconded, please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
All right, it comes back to council. I'm going to go ahead and start, if you don't mind. It may surprise you, it kind of surprises me, that I'm going to advocate for wiping out the fine. I think that he is going to pay a lot for this. I think he's a good citizen. I think he was duped. I don't think he's the person that intended to cause this problem. And we're going to get money in other ways to cover our costs. I agree with him. I don't think the costs are representative of what they really would cost. So it's, and I want to say that with the caveat that when he walked up, my intention was, I'm so frustrated with these marijuana dispensaries that I want to hit them with everything we got. Everybody's involved. But like it is so often in real life, people come up and there's extenuating circumstances, and you get to know people and you realize that it's not always as cut and dry as it might appear. So that's my recommendation. I'm glad to sit back and listen to what you gentlemen have to say. Well, let's just go down the line. Gary?
Well, I feel about the dispensaries just as you do, Mr. Mayor. They're just a bane on this community. We have all sorts of trouble with them. Someone, in this case, they cared so little for the employees, they had one that almost died. And I have a question, with your permission, to Morgan. Now that he's got the $2,500 a day fine for being the owner of a property that had an illegal activity, right?
Yes, that's excuse me, that's correct. But that's not what's before you today.
Well, Yeah, but that's negotiable at some later point, right?
Yes, that hasn't before you. What is here is cost recovery. This is actual cost, out-of-pocket cost of the city to do this work.
Well, I think you took in $20,000 of income that you probably wouldn't have had otherwise in rent, which is astronomical for that area. That should have been, sometimes it's too good to be true. It's not true. It's something bad going on. And I do want to send a message to the other landlords in the community that want to look the other way while we have these marijuana dispensaries open up. I think the dispensaries profit from the suffering of others. And it's kind of sickens me what they do to their employees, how they put them in such incredible danger. So I don't think the taxpayers should pay for the expenses that they've created for the city. And I can't know in good conscience as a taxpayers to pay that $6,600. So on the other fines, which will come later, that may be a different story. So I think we need to collect that $6,600.
I agree, and we'll address the fines later at a different date. I wouldn't be in favor of reducing all of them, but I would possibly compromise at some point.
I would consider a payment plan, like 6-month payment plan on that. I wouldn't waive it, but to help you alleviate, I know you're going through a few other lawsuits. The ADA one is a complete loss. That one sucks. Been through those, but I would do a payment plan, some 6 months or something. Then you wouldn't feel it as much. But yeah.
I agree with Gary. We are the watchdog of the people's resources, which is time. And in this case, this item is about cost recovery to enforce something. And I agree, we owe the taxpayers to recover the cost of enforcing illegal activity. The time for consideration, I think, comes more on a later item, which would be the civil penalties item. The civil penalties really more are a punitive type of they could be a punitive type arrangement. And so I don't find that you had any malice intent trying to scam the people of El Cajon. So in that sense, the punitive place is where I think we should make our adjustments. But in this case, for the item before us, cost recovery to enforce an illegal activity, I can't ask the people of to say to the people of El Cajon, we're going to absorb this one, he's going to keep all of his rent. So I would agree that we should recover the full $6,600 staff has said cost and time, and a later time for adjusting any punitive amounts.
Cool. Anyway, want to discuss a compromise?
600 now.
You want this?
Yes.
All right. Well, that sounds like council has made up their minds. Just someone have to make a motion.
Move to have staff collect the $66,1695 within 90 days.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Please vote.
Motion carries by a 3-2 vote with Mayor Wells and Councilmember Kalasha voting no.
Just to clean up a little bit, I think it was Ben talked about a payment plan. Is that something that we should deal with here at this level, or will you deal with that at the staff level?
Well, the motion was to pay within 90 days, so it was approving the staff recommendation to pay in 90 days.
My mistake. All right. Thank you.